His voice was like ice, sharp and cutting, stripping away the fragile layer of civility in the room. "The problem was never my wallet," Aiden said, his gaze fixed on my father. "The problem was that you measured your own daughter's worth by the man she married, and when you thought that man had no money, you decided she was worthless, too." My mother flinched, her hand flying to her chest as if she'd been struck. My brother, Mark, stared at the floor, his usual arrogance completely gone, replaced by a pale, sickly shame. My father's mouth opened, then closed, no words coming out. They stood in the entryway of our new home, surrounded by expensive, desperate peace offerings, a designer handbag, a box of rare cigars, all of them now looking cheap and pathetic under the weight of Aiden's words. I stood behind him, my hand on his arm, silent. For the first time, I didn't need to say a thing. He was my voice, my shield, my verdict. He took a small step forward, and they all took a step back, as if his quiet fury was a physical force. "Now you will leave," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, and in the deafening silence that followed, I felt the first tremor of a freedom I never thought I'd know. But that freedom was bought at a steep price, a price settled for weeks earlier. For weeks earlier, it all began with a piece of paper, not just any paper, but a creamy, recycled cardstock I had chosen myself. It held the weight of my future, the shape of my joy. I'd spent weeks designing our wedding invitations, pouring all my love and skill as a graphic designer into them. The design was simple, a delicate watercolor of a lakeside willow, its branches dipping into the water. Our names, Clara and Aiden, were scripted in a soft, elegant font below. It wasn't flashy, it was us. I held the stack of invitations against my chest as I drove to my parents' house in Northwood Hills, the Chicago suburb where I grew up. It was a place where manicured lawns were as important as stock portfolios, and appearances were everything. My fiancé, Aiden, was the opposite of all that. He was a craftsman, a man who ran a small, successful business making bespoke furniture. His hands were often calloused, and he smelled faintly of sawdust and varnish, a scent I found more comforting than any expensive cologne. He was kind, grounded, and he loved me for who I was, not for what I could represent. I parked in the pristine driveway, my little Honda looking like a dinghy next to my father's gleaming BMW. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to the imposing front door, the joy in my heart a fragile bubble I hoped wouldn't burst. "I brought them," I announced, walking into the living room where my mother, Eleanor, was scrolling through her iPad. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. My father, Richard, was in his leather armchair, reading the Wall Street Journal, and didn't even bother to lower the paper. My brother, Mark, was lounging on the sofa with his latest girlfriend, Tiffany, a woman who seemed to be chosen for how well she matched his designer watch. "Brought what, dear?" my mother asked, her tone already laced with a familiar, weary condescension. "The invitations," I beamed, pulling one from the top of the stack and handing it to her. She took it between her thumb and forefinger, as if handling something distasteful. Her eyes scanned the simple design, her perfectly shaped eyebrows slowly drawing together in a frown. She stared at it for a long, silent moment. I felt the bubble of my happiness begin to shrink. "Are you serious, Clara?" she finally said, her voice low and tight. She didn't look at me. She looked at the invitation as if I'd handed her a flyer for a pizza parlor, a hole-in-the-wall restaurant by the lake. "This is where you're having your wedding." She tossed the invitation onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a soft, final thud. "Oh, what a shame," she murmured, more to herself than to me. Mark, ever the opportunist for mockery, snatched it up. He held it out for Tiffany to see, a smirk playing on his lips. "Look, Tiff," he said, struggling to hold back a laugh. "My little sister's having her grand wedding here. Isn't it picturesque?" Tiffany, bless her heart, tried to fake sympathy. covering her lips with a manicured hand. Oh, no. How quaint. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. I looked towards my father, a desperate, childish hope still flickering within me. He finally lowered his newspaper, his eyes cold and dismissive. "Don't count on me," he said flatly. "I'm not going to make a fool of myself at a backyard barbecue they're calling a wedding." "But, Dad," I started, my voice trembling. "No buts. Clara." He cut me off, turning a page. "That's not a wedding. It's a neighborhood block party." As if on cue, summoned by the cosmos to deliver another round of ridicule, my Aunt Carol breezed in through the patio door. "What are you all talking about?" she asked in her chirpy, intrusive way. "About Clara's little wedding," my mother muttered contemptuously, as if the very word wedding bothered her in this context. Aunt Carol's face lit up with the cruel glee of shared gossip. "Oh, yes, my friend Susan from the club already told me. Her niece is friends with the owner of that little place. She said it's such a pity you've settled for so little. Clara, after all the investment in your education." Mark let out a loud, barking laugh. "They're going to think we've gone bankrupt or something worse. God, this is embarrassing." Deep down, I knew this would happen. I wasn't expecting a standing ovation for choosing love and intimacy over a lavish display of wealth. But hearing it, so raw and unfiltered, from their own mouths, was like getting slapped in slow motion. The air in the room grew thick with their judgment, suffocating me. I felt small, foolish, and utterly alone. Something inside me either shattered or hardened in that moment. I reached for the invitation on the table, my hand shaking slightly, and tucked it back into my purse. The beautiful cardstock now felt crumpled and cheap in my hands. I stood there for a second, a ghost in my own family's living room, watching them move on to another topic as if I had already left. They would see who really had the miserable wedding. I didn't sleep that night. My family's words played on a loop in my head, a cruel and relentless melody. But it wasn't just the words spoken that afternoon. It was an echo, the final, crashing chord of a harsh opera I had grown up listening to, sitting in the darkness of my own small kitchen, the clock on the wall ticking away the silent hours. The humiliation of the afternoon faded into a carousel of memories, each one a testament to the same painful truth. I was 19 when I introduced them to my first real boyfriend, Leo. He was a genuinely nice guy, kind and funny, working as a mechanic to put himself through engineering school. I remember my mother's frozen smile and her private remark to me later that night, her voice dripping with false concern. "Darling, love is lovely, but it doesn't pay the bills at the garage. You need to aim higher." Higher always meant richer. When I was 23, I told my father I was quitting the law degree he had chosen for me to pursue my passion for graphic design. He didn't even look up from his desk. "So much investment in your education," he'd said, his voice flat with disappointment, "for you to end up making little drawings. What a waste." And then there was the constant, unending comparison to my brother, Mark. His every promotion at a cutthroat marketing firm was celebrated with lavish dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford. His new cars were a source of immense family pride, spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. When I sold my first major piece to an independent gallery in the city, a moment that felt like the culmination of all my dreams, Mark's comment at Christmas dinner was, "Well, at least it pays the rent for a month. There are levels to everything." Right. Levels to everything. That was his favorite phrase. A neat, tidy way of putting everyone and everything into a box defined by price tags and prestige. It was always the same. Money was the measure of worth. Status trumped affection. Appearances mattered more than happiness. I finally understood, sitting there in the pre-dawn gloom, that their reaction to my wedding had nothing to do with the venue or the invitations. It never did. It was about me, once again, choosing a path they couldn't brag about in their social circle. It was about me choosing a man they perceived as simple, a man without a recognizable brand name attached to his own. The kitchen clock chimed 3 o'clock The weight of a lifetime of these small, sharp cuts sat heavy in my chest. A dull, throbbing ache. I couldn't carry it alone anymore. I picked up my phone, my fingers hesitating over Aiden's name before I finally pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep but instantly concerned. "Clara, what's wrong?" And just like that, the dam broke. The story of the invitation came pouring out, my voice cracking with unshed tears. I told him everything. About Leo the mechanic, about my little drawings, about Mark and his endless talk of levels. I told him about the frozen smiles and the dismissive sighs, the years of feeling like a disappointment. I told him my own family wasn't coming to our wedding because it wasn't good enough for them. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, a slow, steady rhythm in the dark. For a terrifying second, I wondered if I had scared him off, if he finally saw the baggage I came with. Then he spoke, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of something hard and unyielding that I had never heard before. "That's it. Then," he said. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "I have something to confess to you, Clara," he said, and a shiver of a different kind went down my spine. "My father, he doesn't just sell furniture. That's his hobby, a small side business he loves." I was confused. "What are you talking about?" "Aiden." He took a deep breath. "He owns a real estate development company, Kauri Enterprises. They build luxury resorts and hotels all over the world, but mostly in the Middle East. We've been working with international investors for decades." He paused, letting the information sink in. "He always told me to keep it private here. People treat you differently when they know you have money," he'd say. He wanted me to find someone who loved me for me. I was speechless, my mind reeling. Kauri Enterprises. I'd seen the name on glossy magazine covers, on news reports about breathtaking architectural marvels in Dubai and Qatar. It didn't seem real. "Are you kidding me?" was all I could manage. "Not at all," he said softly. "And my mother isn't just a housewife. She's one of the lead architects at the firm. She has contacts that could build a city from scratch." He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "When I tell them what your family did to you, when I tell them what they said, oh, Clara," his voice hardened again, turning from steel to diamond, "they want a money show. We'll give them the show of their lives." I hung up the phone, the silence in my apartment suddenly feeling vast and alien. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Kauri Enterprises. I stumbled over to my laptop, my fingers fumbling on the keys as I typed the name into the search bar. The results flooded the screen. It was all there, in stark, undeniable black and white. Forbes articles titled "The Hidden Architect of the Middle East's Luxury Boom." Architectural Digest features on sprawling resorts in Oman that looked like palaces from another world. News reports on multi-million-dollar donations to humanitarian foundations. And there, in a photo from a gala in Geneva, was Aiden's father, a man I'd only known as a kind, soft-spoken gentleman who smelled of wood polish and strong coffee. He was standing next to a European royal, looking completely at ease, a quiet power radiating from him that I had mistaken for simple contentment. I felt a wave of vertigo. The man I loved, the man I thought I knew so well, was part of this world, a world so far removed from my own that it felt like a fantasy. For a moment, a cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. Was he a stranger? Had our entire relationship been a lie? But then I remembered the sound of his voice on the phone, raw anger on my behalf, the fierce protectiveness. No, the man was the same. Only the circumstances had changed. And with that thought, the fear began to recede, replaced by something else, something shaky and new, a glimmer of power. The next morning, he was at my door before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept either, but his eyes were clear and resolved. He pulled me into his arms, and I buried my face in his chest, breathing in his familiar scent. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," he murmured into my hair. "I was going to. Before the wedding." But my father was so insistent. He'd seen so many people try to use our family. He just wanted me to be sure. Sure of what? I asked, my voice muffled by his shirt. He pulled back to look at me, his hands framing my face. That I'd found someone who saw me. Just me. Not a name or a bank account. And I did. Clara, I found you. I looked into his eyes and saw the same Aiden I had fallen in love with, one who would spend hours watching old movies with me, who remembered my favorite kind of tea, who held my hand in the dark. The vertigo was gone. This was real. Okay. I breathed out. Okay. So what now? A smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Now, he said, you go get dressed. We're going to my parents' house. They want to see you. The drive was a journey into another world. We left my artsy, vibrant neighborhood of Logan Square and headed north, the city's dense architecture giving way to the sprawling, tree-lined avenues of the North Shore. My parents' neighborhood, Northwood Hills, was a land of new-build mansions, each one grander and more ostentatious than the last, all shouting new money. But Aiden took a different turn, heading towards Lake Forest, an older, quieter enclave of wealth. Here, the houses weren't just big. They were estates, set far back from the road, hidden behind old-growth trees and elegant stone walls. It was a place where wealth didn't need to announce itself. It simply existed. He turned into a long, winding driveway, marked only by a discreet number on a stone pillar. The house came into view slowly, not a modern glass box, but a timeless stone manor covered in ivy, with lush gardens that looked like they had been tended for a century. It was breathtaking, but in a way that felt like home, not a showroom. Before I could even process my nerves, the front door opened, and a woman with striking silver-streaked dark hair and warm, intelligent eyes came out, smiling. This was Aiden's mother, Layla. Clara, my dear, we were so worried, she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of roses and cinnamon. Her embrace was strong and genuine. Behind her, Aiden's father, Ferris, stood in the doorway, his kind face etched with concern. He gave Aiden a brief, firm hug before turning to me. Welcome, Clara, he said, his voice a deep, comforting rumble. Please, come in. We've made coffee. They treated me not like a guest, but like a daughter who had come home upset. They led us into a library, a room that made my book-loving heart ache with joy. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were filled with books in English and Arabic. The air was warm, and a fire crackled in a large stone hearth. There was art on the walls, but it was eclectic and personal, not chosen by a decorator to match the furniture. Layla handed me a small, delicate cup of cardamom-spiced coffee. Aiden told us a little on the phone. She began gently, her dark eyes full of empathy. But we want to hear it from you. What did they do? Encouraged by Aiden's hand on my back, I told them everything. I recounted the scene in my parents' living room, repeating the cruel words, the dismissive gestures, the casual cruelty. As I spoke, I watched a transformation happen. Layla's warm expression slowly hardened, her eyes turning into chips of obsidian. Ferris's jaw tightened, and he rested his hands on the arms of his leather chair, his knuckles white. The cozy warmth of the room was replaced by a palpable, protective anger. When I finished, silence fell. Layla placed her cup down on a small table with a quiet, decisive click. Unacceptable, she said, the single word carrying the weight of a final judgment. She looked at Ferris, a silent communication passing between them. He simply nodded, his eyes never leaving my face. Without another word, Layla stood up and retrieved her iPad from a side table. She sat back down, her posture straight and regal, and her fingers began to fly across the screen. They want a show of status, she said, her voice dangerously calm. They are about to learn the difference between posturing and power. She tapped her screen, bringing up a contact. Leela, she said into her phone, her tone shifting from motherly to commanding. I realized she was speaking to an assistant. Cancel my meetings for the rest of the week. We are planning a wedding. I need you to book the Azure yacht for a private ceremony in Dubai. Yes, the 200-foot one. And get me Tariq Al-Jamil, the photographer who did the Al-Rashid wedding. I don't care what his schedule is. He will make time. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of quiet, efficient power, while she continued making calls, switching effortlessly between English and Arabic. Ferris leaned forward. "Clara," he said, his voice soft but firm, "anyone who messes with the woman my son loves, messes with this family. What your family did was not just an insult to you. It was an insult to us." He paused, his gaze intense. "What do you need from us for those people to eat their words?" Tears welled in my eyes, but for the first time in 24 hours, they weren't tears of humiliation or pain. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude. I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love and approval of a family who saw me as a liability. And here, in this room, were to near strangers, ready to move heaven and earth to defend my honor. I don't know," I whispered. Layla finished her call and looked at me, a sharp, brilliant smile on her face. "Don't you worry, my dear," she said, holding up the iPad. "I do. This will be the wedding of the year, and your family won't even be on the guest list." The days that followed were a whirlwind, a masterclass in strategic planning orchestrated by Layla Khoury. She transformed her elegant home office, with its panoramic views of the manicured gardens, into our command center. It felt less like planning a wedding and more like orchestrating a corporate takeover. My own life, which had always felt small and personal, was suddenly the subject of high-level strategy sessions, complete with flowcharts and timelines. It was surreal, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. One afternoon, Layla sat me down with Aden at a large mahogany desk. "Before we build our campaign," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike, "we must understand our target audience. We need to know their weaknesses, their desires, their pressure points." She projected a screen onto the wall, and my stomach twisted when I saw my brother Mark's Instagram profile. It was a curated shrine to consumerism. Every photo was a carefully staged display of wealth, him leaning against his BMW, always with the logo perfectly framed, holding a glass of scotch at an exclusive club, tagging designer brands Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Rolex in every other post. "Your brother is obsessed with the appearance of success," Layla observed, taking notes on a legal pad as if she were a detective profiling a suspect. "He doesn't just want to be rich. He wants everyone to know he's rich. His entire identity is built on external validation." Next, she pulled up my mother's Facebook page. It was a desperate performance of leisure and class. Photos of her Cancun vacations were captioned as if she'd been summering in the French Riviera. Every charity luncheon was documented, every designer purchase subtly placed in the background of a photo. She posted articles about the importance of marrying into the right kind of family, a passive-aggressive jab clearly aimed at me even before the wedding drama. "And your mother," Layla continued, her lips thinning into a tight line, "is terrified of being seen as ordinary. She equates social status with self-worth. Her greatest fear is that her friends will look down on her." Then came my father's LinkedIn profile. His title, his accomplishments, his connections so meticulously listed. He posted articles about fiscal responsibility and the dangers of debt. Another thinly veiled criticism of my career choice. Ferris, who had been listening quietly from an armchair, spoke for the first time. "They're posturing," he said, his voice laced with a weary disdain. "People who are secure in their position, in their own worth, don't need to show off so much. It's a sign of deep insecurity." He looked at me, his eyes kind. "They are small people, Clara, and we are about to show them just how small." Layla nodded in agreement. "Exactly, and that is their vulnerability." She turned back to her iPad. "So, we will not attack them directly. We will simply create a narrative they cannot compete with, a world they are desperate to be a part of but will never be invited into. The gossip has to filter out naturally. Her plan was brilliant in its simplicity. She created a new, private Instagram account. The username was understated, at Aden Clara. Journey. We won't add your immediate family, she explained, her finger hovering over the screen. That would be too obvious. They would know it's a performance. Instead, she began searching for names. We add your second cousin, Sarah, the one who loves to gossip. We add 2 of your old colleagues who are still friendly with your mother's circle. We create a small, curated audience of leaks. They will do the work for us. The first phase of the plan was codenamed the bait. We need to test the waters, Layla declared. Give them something small to talk about, to whet their appetites. The next day, she took me shopping on Oak Street, Chicago's equivalent of Rodeo Drive. I'd walked down this street 100 times, always as an outsider looking in, admiring the beautiful things in the windows. Today, I was walking into the stores. It felt like putting on a costume. Layla was a woman on a mission. We didn't browse. We acquired. In Hermes, she selected a classic Birkin bag in a subtle taupe color, a statement of timeless elegance, not a trendy purchase. She instructed. In a private viewing room at a luxury watch dealer, she and Ferris picked out a simple but stunning Cartier watch for me. A pre-wedding gift. It's about taste, not flash, Ferris explained. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. Isn't this too much? I whispered to Aden as Layla finalized the purchases. This isn't me. He squeezed my hand. For now, think of it as a uniform for a role you're playing. He said softly, the real you is safe with me. This is just for them. The following afternoon, Layla staged the first photo. We went to a chic, sun-drenched cafe in the Gold Coast. She had me sit by the window, the Hermes bag placed casually on the table next to my latte. She took a picture over my shoulder, catching the Cartier watch on my wrist as I reached for my cup. It was a perfect shot, effortless, beautiful, and screamingly expensive. She uploaded it to the private Instagram account with a simple, innocuous caption, "Coffee dates before the wedding madness begins." Then, we waited. It didn't take long. The next morning, a comment appeared from my cousin Sarah. "Oh my God, Clara, that bag is gorgeous. You're glowing." The first ripple. We knew Sarah would immediately send a screenshot to the family group chat. The proof came that night. A text from my Aunt Carol, her tone dripping with false concern. "My dear, I hear you're buying very expensive things. I hope you and Aden are being sensible. It's better to save for a house. You know, Layla, Aden, and I were gathered in their library when the text came through. I read it aloud, and Layla erupted into a delighted, throaty laugh. "It's working," she declared, clapping her hands together. "The gossip has reached the inner circle. I bet they have a family group chat right now, buzzing with theories about your new lavish lifestyle." She was not mistaken. The next day, I got a furtive text from Sarah. "Hey, don't tell anyone I told you, but the family chat is going crazy. Your mom thinks you're racking up credit card debt to impress Aden. Your brother said," and I quote, "she's trying to play in a league she can't afford. This is going to end badly." I showed the text to Layla. A predatory smile spread across her face. "Perfect," she purred. "They are writing the script for us. They've cast you as the reckless, irresponsible social climber. They have no idea they're the ones who look foolish." She picked up her phone and began dialing. "What are you doing?" I asked. She looked at me, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "The bait worked, my dear," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as someone answered on the other end. "Now comes the fun part." She turned away slightly, speaking into the phone. "Hassan, it's Layla Kauri. I need the jet. We're going to Dubai." The private jet was the first real shock to my system. I had flown my whole life, but always in coach, crammed into a narrow seat with my knees pressed against the one in front of me. Stepping onto the Kauri family's Gulfstream was like entering a five-star hotel suite that happened to fly. Cream leather seats, polished dark wood, and a flight attendant who greeted us by name and offered us champagne before we even took off. It was a level of reality so far beyond my own. It felt like a dream. Aiden must have seen the awe on my face. He took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. My family has spent 20 years building palaces for people who spend in one night what your family earns in a year, he said, his voice low and steady. This isn't too much. Clara, you deserve this. You deserve to be celebrated. My mother-in-law-to-be, Layla, was already in her element, tapping away on her laptop. Every luxury wedding needs witnesses, she announced without looking up. Lots of witnesses. This trip to Dubai wasn't a vacation. It was, as Aiden had called it, a deliberate deployment. Every move was calculated. Every post a carefully placed chess piece. The first move was subtle. As the jet climbed through the clouds, I took a photo. Just my hand, my new Cartier watch gleaming on my wrist, holding a crystal glass of champagne. In the background, the curved window of the jet showed the endless blue sky. I posted it to my public Instagram story, a place my family still followed. No caption, just an airplane emoji. It was the first piece of bait thrown into the wider ocean, a quiet declaration that something had changed. When we landed at Dubai International Airport, a chauffeur in a pristine dark gray suit was waiting, holding a tablet with our names elegantly displayed. He led us to a black Maybach, its interior silent and cool. I didn't record that part. Layla's instructions were clear: never show the effort, only the result. True luxury is effortless. We didn't go directly to our hotel. Instead, we went to another one, the magnificent Jumeirah Al Nassim, a resort Layla had co-designed 5 years prior. In the grand lobby, carved from marble and onyx, there was a small, discreet plaque dedicated to the chief architects. Her name was there, etched in gold. Aiden took a modest snapshot of me standing in the lobby, a silhouette against the soaring architecture. He posted it to our private account with a simple caption, bringing Clara to see some of Mom's handiwork. It was a quiet bomb. For anyone who bothered to look up her name, the truth of their wealth would become immediately apparent. But we were counting on my family's arrogance, their belief that they already knew everything, to keep them from digging too deep, at least for now. From our suite at the Burj Al Arab, a place so opulent it felt like living inside a jewel box, the view was staggering. The entire city of Dubai glittered below us like a carpet of diamonds. I took a photo of the view, a silhouette of me looking out the window, and posted it to the private account for our designated leaks. The caption, written by Layla, was pure poetry. Sometimes, life has a way of settling the scales. We knew someone would take a screenshot. We knew it would end up in the family group chat. It was simply a matter of time. Day one was for acclimatization and preparation. We met with Layla's personal designer, a man named Kamal who had dressed half the royalty in the Emirates. He had already prepared a selection of gowns and outfits for me. Trying them on, I felt like I was shedding my old skin. The simple, practical girl from Chicago was disappearing, replaced by a woman I barely recognized. A woman who looked like she belonged in these rooms, on these private jets. Later, we walked through the Dubai Mall, a place so vast it felt like its own city. We bought a few pieces of casual jewelry. Layla sent photos from her own private account, knowing exactly who among her followers would see them and what stories they would tell. Day two was the yacht tour. It wasn't just any yacht. It was the Azure, the 200-foot vessel Layla had booked, owned by one of Ferris's business partners. Its deck was as white as snow, its crew silent and efficient. We sailed along the coast as the sun began to set, the Dubai skyline lighting up in a spectacular display. It was a vision of wealth so profound it was almost vulgar, yet the experience itself was serene, beautiful. I shared only one photo from that day, a picture of the skyline from the water at night, the city lights reflecting like shattered jewels in the dark sea. The caption was deliberately understated, a humble view to start our life together. I'm not sure who captured the screenshot and sent it to my brother, but it took less than 30 minutes. A notification popped up on my phone. Mark had commented on an old public photo of mine. A picture of me and Aiden hiking last fall. His comment was dripping with sarcastic venom. Did you win the lottery or what? Be careful with that debt. Little sister. Things like that have a way of catching up to you. I was sitting on the deck of the yacht, a cashmere shawl round my shoulders, having my nails professionally manicured for the ceremony. I didn't even feel a sting. I just showed the phone to Layla. Perfect, she said, not even looking up from her magazine. He's biting. He's feeling insecure. That means we're winning. My mother wasn't far behind. She commented on a different photo. One of me and Aiden at a local Chicago restaurant from months ago. Daughter, I hope you're being prudent. Love doesn't pay the credit card bills. Aiden, Layla, and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. The sound echoed across the quiet waters of the Persian Gulf. They had no idea. They had absolutely no idea they were meticulously documenting their own downfall. They thought they were punching down, offering condescending advice from a position of superiority. But from our vantage point, they just looked pathetic, like ants yelling at an eagle soaring high above them. On day 3, we decided to ramp up the intensity. It was the day before the ceremony, and it was time to move from implication to outright declaration. We shared a carousel of photos on the private account, a carefully curated story of pre-wedding preparations. There was a shot of a professional makeup artist laying out her tools, a close-up of the exquisite lace fabric of my wedding dress, a glimpse of the dress itself hanging on a gold hanger against the panoramic view from our suite. In one photo, I was seen holding a glass of champagne, my ring gleaming brighter than usual. Then came the masterstroke, a single, powerful image, our hands intertwined on a dark wood table. His Patek Philippe watch, a masterpiece of quiet, masculine elegance, was clearly visible. My engagement ring, which suddenly seemed 10 times more brilliant, was next to it. The caption I wrote, with Layla's guidance, was almost surgical in its precision, marrying the richest man I know in ideals, in spirit, and, as it turns out, in everything else as well. Thank you for teaching me what true worth really is. At Aiden Cowrie. This was the first time his full name, his real name, was publicly linked to mine. We knew what would happen next. My cousin Sarah, bless her gossiping heart, was the first to comment. Wait, Cowrie, is this the same Aiden everyone thought sold chairs? Another distant relative, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, replied to her comment, Sarah, you need to Google his full name. I just fell out of my chair. Literally. And just like that, the floodgates opened. Someone did Google him, and they shared what they found. A screenshot of a Forbes article was the first thing to appear in the family group chat, forwarded by a shocked Sarah. The title was blunt, Aiden Cowrie, the quiet force behind Cowrie Enterprise is Middle Eastern Empire. Then came another link, Ferris Cowrie, founder of the Green Humanity Foundation, secures multi-million-dollar donation in Geneva. Screenshot after screenshot flooded their chat. Someone even sent his LinkedIn profile, with its list of board memberships and international projects. And then, silence. The family chat, which had previously been a relentless machine of snide remarks, condescending theories, and contempt disguised as concern, fell utterly silent. 15 minutes passed. Nothing. No emojis. Not a single wow. Certainly no congratulations. There was only the crushing, digital weight of their pride collapsing in real time. They had bet everything on the belief that I was a failure, that I had married beneath them, and in the space of a few Google searches, they had lost it all. The silence was a confession. It was more damning than any angry outburst could have been. In that quiet, I could almost hear the frantic calculations, the whirring of gears in their minds as they tried to reconcile the man they had mocked with the man on their screens. The Aiden who sold chairs was gone, replaced by Aiden Cowrie, heir to a global empire. And I, the daughter they had pitied and scorned, was suddenly the one holding all the cards. Then came the cleanup. It started with my brother, Mark, I watched in real time as his sneering comment about my debt vanished from my old Instagram photo. A few minutes later, my mother's sanctimonious advice about credit card bills was also deleted. It was a pathetic, frantic attempt to erase their own words, as if hitting a delete button could undo the entire story of their arrogance. But the screenshots had already been taken. The words had already been seen. There was no going back. Day 4 was the big day. Our wedding day. The ceremony was held on the main deck of the Azure at twilight. The Dubai skyline, now a familiar and comforting backdrop, began to glitter as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. It was an intimate affair. There were only a handful of guests, Ferris and Layla, two of Ferris's closest business partners and their wives, and a few of Aiden's childhood friends who had been flown in from London and Beirut. Each guest was a quiet titan in their own right, people whose names appeared on buildings and foundations. They were chosen not just for their friendship, but for their social media presence, their high-profile followings. They were the witnesses, the amplifiers of our story. There was no ostentatious display, no unnecessary theatrics. The beauty was in the details. Thousands of white orchids and roses cascaded over the railings, their scent mixing with the salty sea air. A string quartet played softly in the corner. As I walked down the short aisle on Ferris's arm, a lone violinist played a hauntingly beautiful melody. My dress, a simple silk sheath designed by Camo, flowed around me in the gentle breeze. Aiden was waiting for me under an arch of white flowers. He wasn't wearing a standard tuxedo, but a bespoke suit of deep charcoal gray that made his dark eyes seem even more intense. When he saw me, his face broke into a smile so full of love and adoration that it took my breath away. In that moment, the entire elaborate scheme, the revenge, the performance site all melted away. There was only him. There was only us. When we said I do, there was no raucous applause, just a shared, genuine joy that filled the warm evening air. After the ceremony, as the guests mingled and drank champagne, came the final, strategic post. It was a single photo, taken by Tariq Al-Jamil, the renowned photographer. He had captured the moment just after dusk. I was in my dress, Aiden in his suit, and we were holding each other, silhouetted against the warm lights of the yacht and the glittering city behind us. It was a perfect, cinematic shot that looked like a page out of a fairy tale. We posted it simultaneously on both our public Instagram accounts. The caption was simple and elegant: Mr. and Mrs. Khoury, thank you to our beloved family and friends for joining us as we begin this new chapter. Below it, we added a second photo, a warm, candid shot of the four of us, me, Aiden, Ferris, and Layla, all laughing together. The caption for that one was more pointed: a dagger wrapped in velvet, infinitely grateful to my new parents for making our dream wedding a reality. Family are the people who choose to show up for you. I love you both. I tagged Ferris and Layla. Their profiles were private, but their names were now public record, linked to mine forever. Then, the panic started. My father was the first to text. His message was a jumble of fury and confusion. What is all this? What are you trying to do? Humiliate us? Where did you get the money for this? Then my mother's text, dripping with a newly minted victimhood. Why didn't you tell us you were going to do something like this? You left us out on purpose. How could you be so cruel to your own mother? And then, my brother, not a text, but a voicemail. His voice tight with a rage that bordered on hysteria. I still have it saved. I can't believe you did this. Clara, you deliberately made us look like fools. People are asking me if our family is poor. Is that what you wanted? To make us look like poor? Jealous idiots? Well, congratulations. You did it. I didn't respond to any of them. I simply put my phone down and took a sip of my champagne. Watching the city lights dance on the water, the most beautiful thing happened next. Friends of my parents, people from their country club, people who didn't even follow me, began openly commenting on the public photos. Their friends had seen the posts shared by our influential guests. Eleanor, Richard, I didn't realize your Clara had married into the Cowrie family. What a stunning couple. Congratulations. We attended an opening for one of Ferris Cowrie's hotels in Qatar a few years ago. Wonderful people. You must be so proud. Their carefully constructed masks were being ripped off in front of their own social circle. They could no longer pretend to be above everyone else. The gatekeepers of taste and class. They were exposed for what they were, bitter, foolish, and short-sighted. They had been so busy looking down their noses at my little wedding that they had failed to see the kingdom I was marrying into. And then, as the final nail in the coffin, came the video. Layla's team had edited it overnight. It was only 40 seconds long, but it looked like a trailer for a Hollywood movie. Drone footage swooping in over the bow of the yacht. Slow-motion shots of white flowers falling as I walked down the aisle. Crystal glasses clinking. The final kiss against the glittering skyline. The editing was masterful. Not a single second was wasted. We posted it as an Instagram reel. The views surged. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. Then something unexpected and utterly devastating for my family occurred. One of my father's biggest business rivals, a man he both envied and despised, shared the video on his own public Facebook page. His caption read, "When love and elegance come together, things like this happen. A true testament to class. Congratulations to the happy couple and their families." And then, the final, brutal twist of the knife. "Richard, your daughter is a vision. You must be bursting with pride." He tagged my father. It was the ultimate public humiliation. My father couldn't delete the comment. He couldn't hide the post. He was trapped, forced to publicly acknowledge the very event he had deemed an embarrassment, an event that was now being hailed as the epitome of class by the very people whose approval he craved. His desperate attempts to maintain control, to define my worth, had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. The voice messages started pouring in, one after another, each one more desperate than the last. "My Aunt Carol, honey, we need to talk. We could have a celebration here. Right? We can do a second, more informal party for everyone who couldn't make it. An uncle I hadn't heard from in years. Grandma is wondering why she wasn't invited. Her feelings are very hurt." I just watched the notifications pile up, a bitter smile on my face. Aiden came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. We stood there together, watching the digital fallout. Layla joined us, a cup of tea in her hand. She looked at my phone, at the stream of frantic messages, and she said something I will never forget. "Sometimes, the best revenge isn't to destroy anyone," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "It's simply to show them, with undeniable clarity, what they lost by being so arrogant." She was right. The tension had snapped. The masks were off. The truth was out. And the best part of all, I hadn't had to say a single nasty word. I had simply revealed the reality they had always been too blind to see. They had dug their own social grave. I had just turned on the lights so everyone could watch them fall in. We spent the next week in a blissful, disconnected bubble. Layla had insisted on a proper honeymoon, a quiet retreat after the public performance. As she called it, we flew to a private island in the Maldives, to a resort Ferris had built a decade ago, a collection of overwater bungalows, connected by wooden walkways over a turquoise lagoon. There was no strategy here, no audience to impress. There was only the sun, the sea, and the overwhelming relief of silence. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't thinking about my family. I wasn't replaying their cutting remarks or bracing for the next casual insult. The space they had occupied in my head for 28 years, a space filled with anxiety and a desperate need for approval, was finally empty. And into that emptiness, something new was growing: peace. Aiden and I spent our days snorkeling with sea turtles, reading books in a hammock, and talking for hours, truly learning the parts of each other that had been obscured by the chaos of the past few weeks. I learned about his childhood in Beirut, his summers spent on construction sites with his father, and his quiet dream of one day using his family's resources to build sustainable, affordable housing. He was so much more than the wealth he was born into. He was a good man, a man of substance and integrity. My family hadn't just misjudged his bank account. They had completely failed to see his character. One evening, as we sat on the deck of our bungalow, watching the stars appear in the inky black sky, I turned to him. "Did you ever doubt it?" I asked quietly. "Us, when you saw how my family was." He didn't even hesitate. He took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. "I never doubted you, Clara, not for a second. But I did worry. I worried that they had hurt you so much, for so long, that you might not know how to accept a love that came with no conditions." He looked out at the ocean. "Seeing them treat you that way, it didn't make me doubt you. It made me realize how incredibly strong you are to have become the person you are in spite of them." His words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still so raw. I leaned my head on his shoulder, and we sat in comfortable silence, the sound of the gentle waves lapping against the stilts of our bungalow the only sound. I was finally, truly, happy, but we both knew this bubble couldn't last forever. The real world, and my family, were waiting for us back in Chicago. The day we returned, I felt a familiar tension coiling in my stomach as the plane began its descent over the geometric grid of the city. We moved into the beautiful brownstone Aiden had bought in Lincoln Park, a house he'd been quietly renovating for us for months. It was filled with light, art, and the beautiful, handcrafted furniture he'd made himself. It was a home, not a showcase. For a week, there was an eerie silence from my family. No texts, no calls, no voicemails. It was a Cold War, a standoff. They were waiting for me to make the first move, to offer an olive branch, to apologize for their public humiliation. In the past, I would have. The guilt and the ingrained need to keep the peace would have overwhelmed me. I would have called my mother, endured her tearful accusations, and somehow ended up being the one to say, "I'm sorry," but something had fundamentally shifted within me. I was no longer the girl who would apologize for having her feelings hurt. I was no longer willing to shrink myself to make them feel big. So, I did nothing. I unpacked our suitcases. I arranged my books on the shelves in our new library. I started my life. The silence was finally broken 1 week after our return. It was a Tuesday evening, around 7 o'clock. Aiden and I were in the kitchen, making pasta together, laughing as I got flour on his nose. The doorbell rang. We looked at each other, a silent question passing between us. We weren't expecting anyone. Aiden wiped his hands on a towel and went to the door. I heard the sound of the heavy door swinging open, and then voices that were artificially bright, syrupy sweet, and so painfully familiar they made my stomach clench. "Aiden, son, how wonderful to see you." It was my father's voice, but a version I had never heard before, booming with a manufactured warmth that was utterly nauseating. "Love," Aiden called from the entrance, his own voice perfectly calm, giving nothing away. "Your family is here." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I walked out of the kitchen and into the grand entryway of our new home, and there they were. My father, Richard, with a smile so wide it looked like it was physically hurting him. My mother, Eleanor, clutching a large, expensive-looking gift bag from Neiman Marcus, and my brother, Mark, standing slightly behind them, anxiously fumbling with his car keys, his eyes darting around the entryway, assessing, calculating. But what struck me the most was their gaze. It grazed over me for a fraction of a second, a flicker of acknowledgement, before landing and locking onto Aiden, as if he were the sun and there were 3 desperate planets caught in his orbit. I was an afterthought in my own home. "We brought a few little things," my mother said, her voice a high-pitched trill. She pulled a Chanel box out of the larger bag. "For you, my daughter." She held it out in my direction, but was still looking at Aiden. It was a formality, a task to be completed before getting to the real business. My father held out a polished wooden box to Aiden. "Cuban cigars," he announced proudly. "To celebrate. I knew you had the makings of a champion from day one. Son." I could just tell. I just stood there, invisible. The woman they had degraded, the daughter they had dismissed, was now just the inconvenient bridge to the man they wanted to impress. Mark hadn't even greeted me. His eyes were following Aiden's every move. A hungry, almost desperate look on his face. The look of a man who has just found himself in the presence of someone who holds the key to the kingdom he's always wanted to enter. "Please, come in. Sit down," Aiden said, his voice smooth as silk. The casual invitation sent a thrill of apprehension down my spine. This wasn't a social call. This was a tribunal, and my family had no idea they were the ones on trial. He gestured towards the living room. "I want my wife to be present for this entire conversation." He put a slight emphasis on the word wife, and I saw my mother flinch. "After all," he continued, his eyes glinting in the soft light, "it's my turn to defend her." They settled awkwardly onto the plush sofas in our living room, their eyes wide as they took in the tasteful art, the soaring ceilings, the understated elegance of the room. This was not the home of a simple furniture maker. This was the home of someone with taste, and more importantly, the money to afford it. My mother continued to address only Aiden. We wanted a chance to get to know you better. Aiden, we feel so terrible. Please excuse us if we didn't give you the welcome you deserved. We were just worried about Clara." My father laughed uneasily. "It's just that sometimes one misjudges a book by its cover. You know, but it's clear you're a man of the world, a man of substance." My brother, who couldn't stay silent for long when there was a potential opportunity, leaned forward eagerly. "In fact, Aiden, I've got this incredible business idea. An app for luxury hotel concierge services. A real game changer. With your experience in the hospitality sector and my background in finance." Aiden let them talk. He let them spin their webs of flattery and transparent self-interest. He let them perform their desperate calculations, their clumsy propositions, their pathetic attempts to ingratiate themselves with him. I sat on the arm of Aiden's chair, my hand resting on his shoulder, feeling like a ghost at my own haunting. I was watching my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, behave in ways they never, ever had with me. Their respect, their warmth, their attention, it was all for sale, and they had just discovered Aiden could afford the price. Then my mother did something that felt like a final, sharp betrayal. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, velvet-wrapped object. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a vintage gold watch, its face elegant and worn with time. It was my grandfather's watch. I had asked for it for years, for my 21st birthday, for my college graduation. Every time, the answer was the same. "Not yet, Clara," my mother would say. "Your future is so uncertain. It's a family heirloom. It needs to go to someone who will take care of it, someone established." It was her code for, "You are not successful enough to be trusted with our history." Now, she held it out to Aiden. "We wanted you to have this," she said, her voice filled with a reverence she had never used for me. "It's been in our family for generations. You've proven you know how to value things that matter." That was when something inside me, something I had held in check for my entire life, finally snapped. 20 years. 20 years of being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't responsible enough, wasn't worthy enough to wear my own grandfather's watch. And now they were handing it over to a man they had met a handful of times, a man they had despised until they saw his bank statement. It wasn't a gift. It was a bribe. It was a desperate offering to the new god they had found. Before I could speak, Aiden finally moved. He placed his hand gently over mine on his shoulder, a silent signal for me to wait. Then he spoke, his voice no longer smooth or calm. It was steady, but each syllable had a glacial quality that chilled the air in the room. "Let me see if I understand," he began, his eyes moving from my mother's outstretched hand to my brother's eager face. He looked directly at Mark. "A month ago, I was your sister's little charity project, wasn't I? What was the phrase you used? She was playing in a league she couldn't afford. Mark's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. That was a misunderstanding. He stammered, his bravado evaporating. A misunderstanding? Aiden repeated, leaning forward just slightly. The movement was predatory. How do you misunderstand? Enjoying the good things in life. There are levels to everything. Was that also a misunderstanding? He didn't wait for an answer. His gaze shifted to my father. And you, he said, his voice dropping lower. You told my wife that I was going to drag her down into mediocrity. You told her that when I left her in ruins, she shouldn't come crying to you. My father started to speak, to protest. Look, son, I am not your son. Aiden's frigid tone cut through the room like a shard of glass. He turned his attention to my mother, who was still holding the watch, her hand beginning to tremble. And you sent my wife articles about the shame of marrying down. You told her our wedding, the one she planned with love, was so embarrassing it didn't deserve your presence. My mother sputtered. It was a misunderstanding. We were worried about her. We love her. You were worried. Aiden stood up, a towering figure of quiet, controlled rage. Do you know what the most pathetic part of all this is? He looked from one of their stunned faces to the next. I haven't changed. I am the exact same man you met 6 months ago. The only thing that's different is that now you know my father has a bigger bank account than yours. The silence in the room was absolute. Terrible. It was the sound of 3 people being forced to look at their own reflections for the first time. Your problem was never my wallet, he continued, his voice resonating with cold, hard truth. Your problem was that you measured your own daughter's worth by the man she married. And when you thought that man had no money, you decided she was worthless. 2. Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. My father stared at the polished hardwood floor, unable to meet Aiden's eyes. My mother fidgeted anxiously, the velvet box still in her hand. Aiden took my hand and pulled me up to stand beside him, wrapping an arm protectively round my shoulders. But the thing you will never forgive yourselves for, he said, his voice softening with sorrow as he looked at me, then hardening again as he looked back at them, is that the biggest insult wasn't to me. It was to her. You told your own daughter that her love was worthless, that her happiness was an embarrassment, that the most important day of her life was a miserable little party. His voice grew stronger, each word a hammer blow. This extraordinary woman, who loved you unconditionally despite years of you making her feel small. You treated her like trash, because you thought she was marrying someone poor. He took a step towards them. Do you have any idea what that says about you? As parents, as a brother, as people? My mother tried to speak, her voice a desperate whisper. We love her. No. Aiden cut her off, his voice absolute. You loved the idea of her. You loved her conditionally, based on how well she reflected on you. That's not love. That's a transaction. And you thought she made a bad deal. He walked towards the front door and opened it, letting the cool night air rush into the tense, overheated room. The only family I see in this room is my wife, he said, his voice final. The watch stays here. The gifts, too. And you will leave. Now. My father rose, stumbling slightly. You can't throw us out like this. We're her family. Family? Aiden looked at him with an expression of pure scorn. Where was that family when she needed your support? When she was crying alone in her apartment because the people who were supposed to love her, most had just humiliated her on what should have been one of the happiest days of her life. Mark made one last, desperate play. We can start over. We can forget all this. Aiden's laugh was short and completely without humor. Like you forgot your sister existed when you thought having her in your life wasn't convenient for your image. No. Some things aren't forgotten. He held the door open wider. Some wounds are remembered forever, so that we learn who inflicted them. One by one, they walked towards the door, their faces a mixture of shock, shame, and disbelief. They looked like actors who had just been told the play was over and they had failed the audition. As my mother passed me, she reached out, her eyes pleading. "Clara, honey, please." I pulled away. The word felt like acid on her tongue. "I'm not your honey anymore." "Mom," I murmured, my voice so quiet it didn't sound like my own. "I stopped being that the day you decided my happiness was an embarrassment to you." The door closed, shutting out the sight of their retreating figures. The moment it clicked, the strength that had been holding me up seemed to evaporate. Aiden was there in an instant, wrapping me in his arms, and I cried. I cried as I hadn't in years, not for the loss of them, but for the sheer, overwhelming relief of being seen, of being defended, of finally, having someone in my corner who put my dignity above everything else. After a long time, I pulled back, wiping my eyes. "Do you regret it?" I asked him, my voice thick. "Regret what?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "This, marrying me, marrying into all of this." He smiled, a genuine, loving smile that reached his eyes. He gently brushed a tear from my cheek. "Clara, marrying the most valuable woman I have ever known, starting a family with you." He looked deep into my eyes. "Never. They lost an extraordinary daughter tonight. I gained an extraordinary wife. There's no comparison." Later that night, as we were clearing away the untouched gifts they had left behind, I found a small, elegant card that had fallen out of the Chanel box. It was from my mother. Her handwriting was a familiar, perfect script. It said, "Please forgive us. We were wrong. We just want our daughter back." I looked at the words for a long moment. Then, without finishing, I tore the card in half, and then in half again, and dropped the pieces into the trash. Some apologies arrive so late. They're no longer addressed to the person who was hurt. Some wounds go too deep to be healed by a few words on a piece of paper. But for the first time in years, I felt whole. I no longer needed their validation. I no longer craved their conditional affection. I had something so much better. I had a family that chose me for who I was, not for what I had. The months that followed were a study in consequences, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, creeping kind that unravels a life thread by thread. My family had built their entire world on a fragile foundation of appearances and social standing. When we exposed that foundation as hollow, the whole structure began to crumble. The first domino to fall was my brother, Mark. About 6 months after that final confrontation, I found out he'd been let go from his high-powered finance job. The news came from my cousin Sarah, in a text message she sent with a string of wide-eyed emojis, a message she later deleted as if she feared being caught communicating with me. According to her, Mark's boss, a man who had seen the whole wedding saga unfold on social media through mutual connections, had called him into his office. "We don't want people with that kind of judgment in this company," he'd reportedly said. "Character matters here." Mark had spent his life curating an image of a ruthless winner, but in the end, his lack of basic human decency was seen as a professional liability. The levels he was so fond of talking about had finally caught up to him. Then came my parents. Their punishment was quieter, a social death by 1,000 cuts. At their country club's annual charity gala, an event my mother usually reigned over, they were openly disregarded. People who used to flock to their table now offered only polite, distant nods. They were viewed not as the parents of a daughter who had married well, but as greedy, foolish people who had bet on the wrong horse and lost spectacularly. My Aunt Carol, in a bitter, rambling phone call that I ended after 5 minutes, told me they were the laughing stock of their circle. Their desperate attempt to climb the social ladder had ended with them falling right off it. Aiden and I had blocked my entire family on all social media and on our phones. The digital silence became our newfound tranquility. There were no more passive-aggressive notifications, no more emotional blackmail, no more contrived drama. One day, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived, addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. Aiden intercepted it. He took it to the fireplace, and without a word, he tossed it into the flames. He watched it curl and turn to ash before looking at me. Protection above all else. He said simply. I didn't argue. Some wounds don't need more salt poured on them. The most freeing day came when we went to the courthouse to legally change my last name to his. It was more than a tradition. For me, it was a symbolic severing of the last formal tie. The moment I signed the paperwork, I felt a lightness I hadn't realized I was missing. I was no longer Clara Vance, the disappointing daughter. I was Clara Cowrie, a woman defined by her future, not her past. The poetic justice of it all was almost too perfect. In their desperate, lifelong drive for prestige and wealth, my family had sacrificed everything that truly mattered: their relationship with their daughter, their social reputation, and any hope of ever truly belonging to the world they so desperately admired. They were left with a profound poverty of the soul. Their house was still big. Their cars were still expensive. But their world had become incredibly small. I realized the true wealth was never Aiden's money. It was the restoration of my own dignity. It was the discovery that family is not just inherited. It is chosen. It is built, moment by moment, through loyalty, respect, and unconditional love. It was learning that this kind of love exists, even if it doesn't always come from the sources you expect. Some wounds break you. Others forge you into something stronger. This wound had forged me. I no longer needed their approval. I was no longer waiting for their regret. I was no longer carrying the weight of their toxicity. I had something far better. A life of my own, built on my own terms, with people who loved and accepted me for who I truly am, not for who they wanted me to be. And in the end, that is worth more than all the luxury weddings in the world combined. So now I ask you, have you ever had to choose between maintaining family harmony and defending your own dignity? We're taught that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water. But what do you do when the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who make you feel the most worthless? Was the cost of standing up for myself worthwhile? Or do you think, in the end, I should have swallowed my pride and forgiven them, just to keep the peace?